More on the implications of this. Very happy to have Mona Eltahawy joining us. She is a feminist author coming to us today from Montreal. Mona, good to have you with us, and thank you for taking the time for CTV.
Thank you for having me on, Todd.
What do you make of news that Nadia Murad is one of the recipients of this prize?
I think it's great. I think it's a fantastic and necessary acknowledgement of her courage, her resilience, and the work also of Dr. Denis Mukwege. And I think it's also a necessary and very important reminder to the entire world that rape is used as a weapon of war and is not a byproduct of war, which I think was the thinking for too long. For too long, this idea of boys will be boys was also taken into conflict and war zones where this was kind of diminished and people just would shoo it away. But now the Nobel Peace Prize is always political, and it's forcing the entire world at a time when the Rohingya women are being raped and rape is used as a weapon of war, and women in Syria and women in the Democratic Republic of Congo and so many other conflict and war zones where rape is used as a weapon of war. This recognition today is such an important one.
It really is. And in the last couple of years, we have been talking, Mona, here on CTV and right across the media, more about this notion of rape being used as a weapon of war. As you're talking to us now, it strikes me that it's happening all around the world in many different countries because sadly, it can be a very effective weapon of war, especially if people are not aware it's actually going on.
Absolutely. I think what we have to recognize is that it is one of the ways that patriarchy, and I insist that this is a conversation globally about patriarchy, which is a system of oppression, and the use of war, the use of rape as a weapon of war in so many countries is a reminder of the way that patriarchy protects and enables misogyny, which allows this kind of violence. So all the way back to 1992 during the war in the former Yugoslavia, or during the genocide in Rwanda, or as I said, the conflict and war zones that we talk about today, Syria, Myanmar, and others, we have to recognize that this is a way for the state and for the so-called rebels and for all armies to terrorize women and emasculate men. But I also think that part of this really important discussion, and you were talking earlier before the commercial break about the Scarborough rapist, I think it's really important for us as well as a global consciousness to recognize that sexual violence isn't just used in times of war by the state or by rebel groups. It's also a daily reality for so many people. And this is where movements like Me Too, which was begun by the Black feminist activist Tarana Burke, we have to include this in the conversation. We have to include the fact that so many actresses last year talked about it and put it on the global stage. And we have to talk about what's happening in the United States today with this, this impending confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh, who was nominated by Donald Trump, who himself was accused of sexual assault by many women. So this is a very necessary and very comprehensive conversation.
It really is. And it's remarkable how you just there were able to sort of tie all of this together, from what's happening in war zones to politics to what we cover even in the daily news and these sort of incidents of rape and sexual violence, Mona. And we're talking about these conversations now and the discussion, the debate that they are sparking. When somebody is given a Nobel Peace Prize because of the work they have done in raising awareness and fighting sexual violence around the world, what can be done? How do we then try and stop it from being used as a weapon of war?
I think that we have to recognize that this has been happening, and that women and children especially are very vulnerable because their bodies are used as proxy battlefields. And I think that the position especially of Nadia Murad as a survivor herself and as someone who comes from a community for which sexual violence and sexual assault were such taboo issues, here is this young woman who was incredibly courageous and incredibly resilient and who said, I will not be silenced by stigma, taboo, or shame. I think that Nadia is an incredible role model for survivors of sexual violence, whether in war zones or in the day-to-day violence that I spoke about. So I think that we have to smash taboos, we have to smash the stigma around sexual violence, we have to put governments and so-called rebel groups on notice that we will hold you accountable. And it's just only really in the past decade or so that people have been taken to court by the International Criminal Court and the International Court for Justice, on charges of using rape and sexual violence as weapons of war. And then we have to take that conversation and have it day to day and talk about patriarchy. Because for me as a feminist, patriarchy is central to this. And my goal is to destroy patriarchy. And when I say that, I'm not talking about destroying men. I'm talking about a system of oppression that oppresses men and women, because patriarchy oppresses men in the ways that it puts them in a straitjacket of how to behave. Not every man out there engages in sexual violence or rape, but they must also talk back to patriarchy and say, I refuse to wear that straitjacket that you put on me, and I will fight you. I will fight alongside women, whether in war zone or in the day-to-day, against sexual violence and not against women. And I will not use women's bodies as proxy battlefields.
Wonderful conversation, Mona, as always, and thank you for taking a bit of time for us today here at CTV News.
Thank you, Todd.
Mona Eltahawy joining us from Montreal, feminist author, with her take on this wonderful story, the Nobel Peace Prize being awarded to a Yazidi activist, the work that she has done to fight sexual violence in war zones.